Hello everyone, so in this lecture we are going to talk about the optimal camera settings for shooting a video. So having a correct camera setting is the most basic thing that you must fully understand and know how to use it before you get creative. So you must understand it fully before you break the rules. So we will go over several things in this lecture. So this might go a little fast, so try to stay focused. So first thing first, I will show you two examples, one on a Canon DSLR camera, which is this guy right here, and one on smartphone. In this case, I am using an iPhone. So, whoa. Let's get to it. So first thing first, we want to talk about the resolution and FPS. So resolution, we are, we know what it is. So it's the pixel counts of the how much a display can display. So for instance, our regular computer monitors usually have 1080p resolution, which is standard for the high definition video. So that is what we are going to be using to shoot our videos. And FPS is called frame per second. That means that each any video is consisted of frames per. So it means that higher the frame count is, that there is more frames per second it packs. So if, for instance, if you are shooting something really fast movement, I think iPhone has one of those features in it. It has like a slow-mo mode. That means that it's capturing a video on a very high frame per second, so that when you slow it down, it doesn't look choppy. But if you were to take it on like a low FPS and try to slow it down, because we are seeing like a sequence of each frame, the video is gonna get very choppy. Alright, so we'll get into the setting of right resolution. So every camera is a little different. So in this case, I have a Canon, but Sony might have a different settings for it, or Nikon has a different settings, but they are, you'll be able to find it pretty easily. So on Canon cameras, which I have here, you're gonna have to turn it back onto the movie mode, and then we're gonna hit the menu setting right here, and then if you go, you'll see these two icons right here on top. Those are the settings for the video. So if you see, it says the movie recording size, that is the resolution that we're going to be using. So we're going to click that. So it says 1920 by 1080p, and the industry standard for FPS is 24 FPS. I mean, if you're curious why 24 FPS, there's a whole history behind it. So if you're interested, just take a look at that. But since we are dealing with limited equipment situation here, so if you happen to have a Canon camera, I'll suggest to go with the IPB, which is more flexible. But if you have a different camera, just Google it, what it does, and then try to pick one that is more flexible and that is the file size is a little bit smaller. Because if we have like a really big video files, if we were to pull that in our laptops, and then if you don't own like a studio level editing machine, it's gonna be pain in the ass to edit that. So we're gonna choose that. All right, so 1080p and 24 frames per second, and then IPB. First, we have to understand a little thing called exposure. Exposure is really important. Exposure is, think about it as just a fancy word for brightness. So in photography or videography, exposure means that how bright your scene is going to be. So for instance, so let's go to the camera mode here, just to pull up this setting right here. So if you take a look, so on Canon camera, this is going to be very similar to all cameras, even with the smartphones. There is the 4/100, that is the shutter speed, and f2.8, that is the aperture, and then ISO, it refers to as the sensitivity, signal gain. So these three is what is going to decide the exposure of it. So let's break it down one by one. Alright, so for aperture, please take a look at the video that I provided a link for. I think he does the way better job than I do. So just take a look at that and then come back to this video. Alright, so next thing is that's going to decide how bright your shot is going to be is the shutter speed. So as you can see over here, 1/4/100 means that is 1/100th of a second of the shutter speed. So if you're shooting like a really high fast event, like say sports, you are going to have a faster shutter speed, so that you captures the movement. But if you had too slow shutter speed, you probably noticed it when you try to take a picture during night or at a dark environment with your phone. Your what's it called? The picture gets like, has like this motion blur to it. That is because the shutter speed is too slow. But in videography, shutter speed is not as important. I mean, of course, it's very important, but it's less important compared to in the photography. So general rules of thumbs is that you must have a shutter speed that is double of your frame per second. So for instance, if we are using the 24 frame per second, it is we need to at least use the 1/50th of a second, because that is the double amount of or frame per second. So in this case, 1/50th second right there. But if we were to use like for instance 120 frame per second, then we'll have to go up to 50, because that is at least a double of the frame per second. So right now, this is all you need to know. But as you start taking film shooting videos with it, as you understand it, you will be able to break this rule and then get creative. So for now, let's just stick with the double amount of the frame per second. All right, so next thing we're going to be talking about is going to be ISO. So ISO is a value to indicate the electronic signal gain. So what it does is that higher the ISO number is, the brighter your scene is going to be. But since we are electronically boosting our exposure, the brightness of the shot, you are going to start to lose the quality of picture. So you might have noticed that when you try to take a picture with your phone in a dark environment, the picture looks all grainy and it's low, or it doesn't look like a high image quality. That is because the ISO is automatically set to too high, because there's not enough light around the environment. So that's why the phone is gonna try to get the right exposure, so that it's gonna automatically boost the ISO, thus resulting in a bright exposure picture, but at the same time the lower quality image. Alright, so let's take a look at how we can set the camera setting on our Premiere Rush using smartphones and tablets. So let's reopen the Premiere Rush real quick. And Premiere Rush, make sure that you go to the App Store and download this. It's free. And it comes with a really good camera function as well. So that is one of the reasons why I want you to download it. Then when we go to here, we will see this plus sign right here on the bottom. So click that, and then we're gonna touch this, click this, take video or photo right here. And now we are in this camera function now. So I'm gonna use this scene to show the how the different camera settings affect to the brightness and then the color of the scene. So this is my beautiful camera, and first thing first, we're gonna take a look at the turning on the Pro mode. So if you take a look at on the right over here, you see right there, my cursor. So you will see this little thingy says Auto or Pro. So since we're professionals, right, we're gonna turn in the Pro. And then if you do that, you're gonna come up with, you presented with these two guys right here, which we're gonna be talking about later. And then you are also have these settings on the bottom. So this is what we want to look at. So these settings is practically same as the settings that we looked at on the DSLR camera right here. So first thing first, we want to change the resolution. So let's click that, and then we want to set to 1080p, and then frame rate at 24. And then what we are going to do is we're going to go to the left one, which looks like this. So that is supposed to mimic the aperture blades. So right now the auto exposure is turned on, meaning that this circle right here is gonna the camera is gonna automatically set the exposure according to the areas around this circle right here. So we don't want that because auto exposure is hit or miss. So we always want to, for this project, we always want to turn it off. And if you're doing any professional production work, you always want to have the manual exposure on. So notice how it changes with the padlock icon. So if you just touch it, you can turn it on and off with the auto exposure. So we don't want that, so let's lock it. And then now you're presented with ISO and shutter speed. So we went over this. So higher the ISO is, the brighter it's gonna get. The lower the ISO is darker it's gonna get, but the image quality is gonna get better. So in this case, I mean, this is brighter, but you can tell that image quality is not so great. But this is darker, but you can tell the image quality is a lot better. So here, since we are using the 24 frame per second, we are going to use, notice that if I have really fast shutter speed, I don't see anything because it's not letting the enough light. So remember, shutter speed is the amount of time that the shutter lets the light in. So faster it is, it lets less amount of light. The slower it is, it lets in the more light in it. So I think 1 second is a little too extreme. So let's take a look at around 1/6 second. So notice that if I just, twist it around, you see that motion blur right there? Ooh, we don't want that ever, unless you're doing something really creative. But first, you need to learn how to not do this to do this, right? So you need to learn the rules to break the rules. So since we are using the 24 frame per second, we are going to set it to around 150, which is right there. So now let's take a look. That is a lot less motion blur, right? But still I see a little bit, but it's not to the point where it's unbearable. But if I make it faster, you see much less motion blur. But here, we don't want that much of a shutter speed. We're gonna lock it at 150, and then I'm gonna set the ISO to set the desired exposure of the shot. So that is it when it comes to the setting the exposure. So first thing first, always lock it on the double amount of the frame per second FPS for this project. I mean, for a later project, if you want to get creative, you can break this rule. But first, let's understand what it does. So let's lock it to 150th second, and then you're gonna change the ISO according to your desired exposure of the shot. So say if you want to make it super bright, just crank it up, but remember you are going to lose the image quality. So I don't want that. I mean, I like a crisp image, and also I don't want this to be this bright, so I'm gonna set it around there. I think it looks great. Okay, so next option that we get, see, this is exposure bias, which means that if it's only used when we are using the automatic auto exposure, but since we are only using manual exposure, this is not going to do anything. So don't forget about this. And also this circle right here, since we're doing the manual exposure, we don't need this meter. So I'm just gonna push it away because we're not going to be using that. And here is another thing that is called auto balance. White balance. This is really important. So because, let's turn this off. What white balance is that with this white balance setting, we can change the temperature and tint of our shot. So if I want to make it a little bit cooler like this, I can always bring it down and then maybe make it a little bit mysterious by adding like a purple kind of feel to it. Or if you want to make it a little warm and then kind of give it one of those matrix cinematic feel to it, you can always kind of do that as well. And also, let me go to the default auto balance. And also, if you evoke different kind of emotion through temperature, so remember, cooler temperature, it evokes a little bit more harsher emotion, more negative or sad or agony and things like that, more intense. Whereas if you introduce a warmer temperature like this, it's more inviting, soothing, and then more comfortable to eyes. So play around with the temperature and then use it wisely to convey emotion. At the same time, same goes with the tint, but tint is kind of too extreme to use like this. So make sure that you always use the tint that is correct to the temperature. So what I mean by that is if I were to pull this temperature like this, that is quite extreme temperature. A lot of things are looking a little green now, so I'm gonna edit a little bit of you see how this was kind of green even though the temperature was warm. So I'm gonna introduce a little bit of red just to make the black right here to look black, and then white right here to look white. So tint is kind of it is just to kind of support the temperature. Just that's the way I approach it. So for instance, if I were to make it super cool like this, and I think that is good right now, I could give it a little bit of green to make the black look more true to black. Okay, so that is the power of the white balance. And next, the autofocus. So so next thing that we're going to be talking about is going to be this guy right here, and this is the focus point. So what it does is that if I were to put this right there, it's going to focus to this area right here. I mean, it's not showing any like a. Give me a second. Oh, hold on. Is it gonna work? So if I were to notice that my hand, let me find something better, something with a text on it. So notice that if I leave this focus point right here, and then I introduce such a short focus point, notice that the text right here is not so crisp. But if I move this guy right here, then turn on the autofocus, maybe this is too close. It's gonna try to focus on this letter right here instead of right here. So this can be used when if you have, for let's say you have like a human head right here. What you want to do is you always want to focus the your subject's face. So you just move it right here, and then your human human subject face is going to be placed right here. So for instance, if I want to emphasize this area right here, so this is kind of a focal point because this is the only thing that has like a bright yellow, I'm gonna select it right here so that it always focuses on this particular spot right here instead of like somewhere back there, which is going to be kind of random, right? So this also has an autofocus and manual focus. So if you place your box right here and then tap it, it's gonna lock the focus. But if you untap it and then move things around, for instance move your camera around, it's gonna automatically try to grab the focus point right here. So for instance, let me show you an example of focusing back there. It doesn't work very well trying to focus like out of a frame, out of the center frame. Well, let's say I set the focus a little bit. Notice that this letter here gets a little bit blurry, but if I focus it right there, you probably know this already, right? Focus, there you go. So it focused, and if I put it right there, it's gonna focus right there. But if I don't lock it, if I introduce an element like this, notice that how it automatically focuses in and out. I mean, out, in, out. But if I focus it right here and then lock it and then go out, it's not gonna try to autofocus this area. So that's how you can use your focus point. And if you found the desired focus distance, always lock it so that it doesn't have that autofocus jump. So on certain smartphones, even though you put it on the tripod and then just shooting a still shot, sometimes it tries to autofocus on the same spot, and then it'll create this kind of a jump, jerky in the motion. So always, when you find the desired focus distance or focus spot, always lock it and then and then start recording. And another thing that you will see is going to be an option right here. If you own like a camera with several, different lenses, you will have an option where you can change your lenses. So I know, like for instance, like iPhone 11 comes with like 2 lenses, right? Or iPhone 12 Pro has like 3 lenses. So you can always utilize those 3 lenses. But I suggest that you stick with like the regular one, the standard one and telephoto one. nah, scratch that, you know, experiment with all three and see which one you like the most. But I strongly suggest that you stick with the standard one, and then time to time introduce two different focal lengths. All right, so that is it on how, you know, different camera setting affects the brightness and the color of the scene, and that is it. All right, so now we're gonna talk about the lens selection. So if you own a DSLR camera, chances are you own a zoom lens, which means these two right here. So if you take a look at the zoom lens, you can see the number, which means that this is 28mm, 35mm, 50mm, and 60mm, and so on. So this means that you can change the focal length, meaning the length of the lens, and then create a different effect with those. So this focal length has an impact on many different things. So obviously it'll allow you to shoot a video on a longer distance, and at the same time it changes the distortion and also the background blur effect. So that is something that we are going to get later on, but for now on, I want you to stick with a certain focal length that is going to be 35mm and 50mm, but that is 35 and 50mm on full frame camera such as this. So if you don't know what full frame camera is, chances are you don't have one. So if you own like a $500 or $700 Canon Rebel DSLR or somewhere around there, so in that case I want you to stick with the 28 and 35, around 28 or 35. So that is going to be equivalent to 35 to 50. So the reason why making you guys to stick with those focal length is because 35 and 50mm is similar to what human eyes see. So it is not going to look odd. It's not going to look weird. So for instance, if I were to use like a 15mm, it's going to be way too wide to the point where it's gonna look a little different, a little odd and uncomfortable to eyes. At the same time, if I were to use too long, for instance, this big ass lens right here, it goes to 200mm, and that is just going to look weird. So I want you to stick with either 28 or 35. If you own a camera that is not a full frame, if you're not sure, you can always ask me. But if you happen to own a full frame camera, I want you to stick with either 35 or 50. So that is it. So this lens selection was not available to smartphones like these, but nowadays a smartphone comes with multiple lenses these days. So I think this particular phone has the standard, which is going to be to mimic the 35mm experience, and the telephoto around 50 to 85mm, and then a wide angle, which is going to be around 15 to 28mm. So I want you to explore these three options if you have multiple lenses, but I strongly suggest that for this assignment, stick with the standard one, which is going to mimic around 35mm. Or if you are stick with phone like this, you are left with no choice but to stick with the 35mm that is supposed to mimic with this particular phone. So most standard focal length for the smartphone camera is 35mm. So even with just one lens, you are going to do just fine. So there's no need for you to get another phone or DSLR camera like this, because I mean these cost a lot. So alright, so I'll see you guys on the next video.